Because spring is almost here, I think that it's a good moment to show you 13 photos of mine and to share with you 13 tips, ideas, hacks, suggestions. You can call it whatever you want, but all these are related to landscape photography during spring. Spring is a really interesting season. It's the time when, of course, you know, it changes from winter that has really cold temperatures and snow and almost no leaves on the trees, and the season moves to spring where the temperatures become warmer and the leaves and the green are starting to appear and flowers are starting to appear. And because there is this change of temperature, beautiful and interesting things happen to the atmosphere, and the first thing that you're going to see usually is fog. And even though the forest lacks the beautiful vegetation and the full green of the spring, it's still an interesting moment to go into the forest and photograph it, because fog, no matter the season, creates a really beautiful and simple composition. It helps you get rid of the chaos and the clutter of the forest. It's much more easier right now to photograph the forest, but you need to photograph it during foggy conditions to create an interesting atmosphere, because other than in other situations the forest doesn't look that good in this particular moment. As you can see over here, I've framed the road, and it's a beautiful S-curve, and this leads the eye into the mist, into the unknown if you want. And then I used these trees over here and these trees over here as blocking elements that will help you guide your vision and your eye in this area over here. After this, I think it's another beautiful moment would be to photograph the forest when the vegetation, it's really kicking in and you have vegetation on the ground and the trees are starting to have leaves on their branches, and you have again a really beautiful situation also inside the forest. This is not strongly connected to having fog in the forest. You can photograph the forest and having still a beautiful image even without the fog, but I prefer foggy conditions, and that is why I'm illustrating this new concept and this new tip number 2, also using a photo of the forest in a foggy day. As you can see, again I'm having a simple trail that leads into the fog, and then I'm using these dark trees that are facing away from the light. The sun is in this area over here, and this helps me having these trees a little darker than the rest of the forest. And again, I think it's a really beautiful moment to go into the forest and photograph it because of the full and fresh green that is specific to this season, spring. Now let's move to photo number 3, where we have the beauty of mist during the morning. Usually when there is a difference in temperature, that when you have cold and wet nights and then you have a little bit of sun in the morning, then you have a really interesting phenomenon, especially in the mountains, when you see the mist rising from the forest and from the cliffs, and this creates a really beautiful situation. Now you can do a really long exposure, and this is done to overcome the lack of vegetation. As you can see, the grass, it's still yellow, it's still yellow orange, and it's not yet in full color, or in a color that will look really good in a photo. And because of that, you need some type of interest, some type of element that will add a little bit of interest and something more to the photo. And I think a long exposure, it's a way to go, and especially if you have, as you can see over here, some interesting stone formations or some interesting elements, this can lead to an interesting image. Now let's move on to this photo where you can see a church. It's a cemetery. You don't need to concentrate on the sadness that cemetery has associated with, but I think that what you need to take from this is to photograph it in a really low contrast. As you can see, the contrast is really low, the shadows have a little bit of orange in them, and the image is pretty desaturated, and all this to have a certain feeling of freshness, as a feeling of new. And I also captured this tree that is blossoming, and I think including elements that are specific to spring, and this is trees that are blossoming, or trees with fresh green leaves on them. This helps a lot in portraying your idea. Now let's move on to the next photo, where I think the main idea was to capture two seasons together. You see the last remains of the winter with some snow over here, and then you see the trees that are kind of getting those fresh leaves over here. Of course, the fir tree are always green, but during winter the green is becoming more darker, and as the spring comes, as summer comes, the green becomes a little more let's say lighter. But in this image, this is what I wanted to capture, the association between these two seasons, winter and spring in the trees. Let's move on to the next photo, where we have reflections, and you can use reflections to again counter for this lack of vegetation. Of course, I've included this tree that is having these leaves that are specific to spring, and this is also because I wanted to emphasize the idea that it's spring, it's starting to, the nature is starting to change, and winter, it's something that is going to be left behind very soon. Now this photo represents a decision to convert to black and white with the idea to capture the essence. It's a simple plant, if you want, and has some dew on the leaves, and I wanted to capture exactly that. And this image in color would not transmit the same idea. I think that converting it in black and white and emphasizing the leaves and the water drops helps a lot in getting your idea out. And especially during spring, you'll often find dew, and this is again because of the wet and colder nights, and then the morning is a little bit warmer and the sun comes out, and you have this condensation, and you have this beautiful effect, the morning dew. Capturing the motion or capturing the wind, as you can see, the green is full. It's a green that is specific to spring. When it's going to be summer, the green is going to be darker, but right now the green is fresh, the green looks really good. And whenever I have the chance of seeing some trees that are blown away by the wind, especially if it's a high wind, I think it's a really good moment to photograph and to capture an intimate shot, if you want, because as you can see, it's a really close shot. I've used a really long lens to capture this, but the exposure time is a little bit longer, and what it helps is having some elements that are sharper or that are not moving that much. As you can see, I have this tree over here that in this area, because it's thicker, it's not moving that much. Again, this tree in this area, and this helps because it creates some elements that are fixed, that are not moving, and then you can understand better that all the other elements are moving, and in this case are blown by the wind. Spring is a moment when the first flowers are gonna go out, if you want, are gonna blossom, and the forest is gonna be full of them. And whenever I find small patches of flowers inside the forest, I tried to photograph it, and for this I got really low. I used a really wide lens, and I think the focal length was about 16 millimeters for this shot, and a really closed aperture of about f22 to have sharpness over here and over here. Of course you can do focus stacking, but for this situation I wanted to resolve the thing in one shot, and you want to do this whenever there is wind or a little bit of wind in the forest. When there is no wind at all and everything is still, yes, you can do a focus stacking, but when there's a little bit of wind and the leaves are moving just a little bit, you can't do focus stacking. And that is why I decided to go for f22 and have sharpness over here and over here. And I started the photo by having this layer of green vegetation and flowers in the lower part, and then in the upper part I wanted to capture the forest, just to have the viewer in the forest, to let the viewer know that this is a shot inside the forest. The fresh green of the spring, it's a really good element that will help us photograph waterfalls. I think waterfalls look the best during spring, especially because this green is really fresh and really bright, and it's different than the green from summer. As you can see, the composition is fairly simple. I'm starting this photo with a big foreground element, but in this foreground element I have these are some plants, if you want, and these are in the lower left side of the image, and then you go and you go up by using this trunk of the tree, and then you have a counter element over here, and then you go up on this diagonal. Sunrises are going to be extremely dramatic during spring. For example, during autumn it's the same thing, but during spring sunrises benefit from clouds, benefit from mist or lower altitude clouds. There are all sorts of elements that add to the drama of the sunrise, and as you can see, the light is really low contrast, it's warm, it's pleasant to look at, the shadows are not that deep, and you have the chance of creating a beautiful image that it's not violent, it doesn't punch you in the eye saying, look at me, how strong I am, how strong are the colors, how strong is the contrast. The final photo, it's again a black and white conversion, and the reason for that is to capture the drama during spring and also during autumn, because of this alternation of temperature and differences between temperatures. There are lots of chances to have rain, to have storm, to have dark clouds, and in a situation like this, I think converting it to black and white helps a lot to emphasize the drama of the landscape and the power of the moment. These were my 13 tips and ideas and suggestions for your landscape photography during spring, and I hope that all these suggestions were useful to you. I hope that you will decide to subscribe to this YouTube channel, to click the bell notification icon to know exactly when I do a new upload. Keep on photographing, it's the only way that you can get better. Thanks for watching, for supporting and commenting on my videos, and bye bye.